Welcome to This Got Me Thinking, where clarity comes from conversations and the connections that spark from them. I am your host, Chris LaFay, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with Kurt Euler. Have you ever had a job where when you left or they kicked you out, they had to that company had to then go back and backfill your position with multiple people, right? They didn't realize how good they had it until after you actually left. It's kind of like a nice feeling, right? But also sad at the same time too. And I was talking to Kurt about this day because this is what happened to him on multiple occasions. Is when he left, a lot of marketing movements and things changed, and the company's top and bottom line revenue started dipping. And he heard back from a lot of CEOs that he worked with of like, hey, wait, what magic were you wielding over here? And that disconnect in communication all came down to how our expectations set at the very beginning. I'll let Kurt tell a story.
If you go back and ask the CEOs that have worked for or that I've worked for before, they will almost inevitably all say the same thing after multiple of them have been retired from me working with for them. Is they'll be like, Kurt is the best hire I've ever had, or Kurt's the only CMO I've ever liked. But on some of those, especially early on, they didn't realize how great I was at hitting numbers until later. So I care much more about doing, and they saw the company grow, but I was never the marketer that was out there being like, here's all of our numbers and here's our dashboards and here's the pipeline fill. And so they sometimes they felt it when I left. And so like I left, they replaced me with multiple people and numbers still dropped and momentum dropped. And they'd come back and ask what was going on. And I'd look at things and then they'd realize like, oh my gosh, why, like I liked you and I knew we did well. I didn't realize we were doing so much better than what was possible. Um, and so like it got me to kind of really just start to connect. And you hear about like the short tenure of people, and I'm like, wait a second, maybe like okay, let's assume I am above average, but the average person then we see this tenure just flip all the time. 18 months, 24 months, and I'm like, gosh, like apparently I'm hitting numbers and the companies are growing and I'm keeping my jobs and leave basically when I choose to. Like maybe nobody goes and really shares what's actually going on. And so as that started to shift, then I started to make sure I was like setting perceptions up front and changing like how I did things. My actually budgets went way up. I was able to grow faster because I've never had issues with budgets then. And so we could talk a little bit about some of that too. So like I'd go back with a budget and get like extra $1 million than what I'd asked for.
It's a great problem to have. So when you started at, and you can pick and choose whichever one you want to hone into, what how did you first lay out the expectation of what you were going to do?
So now I approach things very differently than I did before. Because before it was much more I'd sit in the business meetings because I came from the business side, not the true marketing side. And I basically before I didn't set expectations. I just heard what they wanted to do and I would just go and build the team and do that or more. Now I focus much more on agreeing upfront on like the business outcomes they want over different time frames, like a shorter time frame, like six months. We'll look at something more mid frame, like agree is it 12 months? Or are we looking at 18 months? And then where would they like to grow the company, especially if we're looking out like 4 or 5 years? And like let's agree up front on those things, the outcomes you want. And then let's pre-fight on the leading indicators that we can agree to today that will let us know that those investments that we'll talk about it later with them for each of those time horizons, like because I kind of will point out, so it's like I was at a mid-market company, we'd sold them a big SaaS company, I became an executive of this public company, and I went to the CFO and I told him what we were going to do for building this large enterprise SEO platform. And I talked to him and I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I could tell it just wasn't connecting. CEO's on board, CFO who owns the checkbooks, like it's not connecting. So I went back and wrote this document that started with saying, all marketers lie. The best thing about marketing is, hey, I can always find a number to make it look like my campaign was successful. So up front, this will be better for everybody if we agree on what the leading indicators will be. And you can ask me any questions you want today about what those will be, so that later we have the same expectations about where we're going. And as I talked through it with the CFO, the first time I did this at this public company, we started to realize something. We were like, actually, I realized, and I kind of came back to him questioning again why he had never liked the head of marketing that he had had a company before. And I was like, if it's 12 months or 18 months after you've hired the person, whether they're exceeding your expectations or not, like if you didn't agree on the expectations and you go question something about like where they've invested time or resources, like is there anything they could say at that point that builds trust or even retains trust? And he was like, I don't think so. And I was like, okay. Cause like what I kind of realized was, I'm like, if you agree on expectations up front, at least it's the same target. But if we don't agree on expectations and it's 6 months or 12 months down the line and you ask me what's going on, what you just told me is anything that I say is going to feel like to you like I'm making up stuff to keep my job. And he was like, yeah, that's pretty much every experience I've ever had growing these mid-market companies through.
Going back to a previous time, when you first jumped in and, for lack of better terminology, immediately started hiring a team based on, we'll just say, tactics. What, while working through that old mode and method, what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were in kind of that period of life and leadership growth?
Justification to my boss. And so like at one of those companies, I was not the CMO of the holding company, but I ran marketing for a large number of subsidiaries that we started, and then a bunch of channel stuff. And so my boss reported to the CEO, and so she's asking questions in board meetings. And it was that scenario I just mentioned where it's like, nobody knows what I'm doing. I have this feeling that where I know that we're over delivering on what anybody could do possible. And so we get into this justification back and forth, which is not healthy anyways. Doesn't allow you to look towards the future, and just ruin the emotional connection back and forth. So it's like the end result of kind of starting that justification. And then when you get pushed more and more, it not only was I getting into justification versus asking for more money for where we should invest and having a business discussion, what ended up having was this toxic discussion where after one of the board meetings, I have this conversation that says, so here's the thing, you'll never be fired here because you over deliver, but I will never promote you from a title perspective regardless. So my comp went sky high, but like I had this very transparent conversation. Like, how toxic was it? Like, so both I didn't get the additional investment that I would have, the company would have gladly given me, and on the pure personal career path, like I kind of got chopped off at that point.
When did you realize that the order of operations and the formula that you were working with was wrong? What was that pivot point?
That pivot for me was years later, being mentored by a gentleman here in Atlanta named Reggie Bradford. And I was leading a bunch of our M&A and funding for the company. And we had done a successful acquisition. And I went out to set up another acquisition that he wanted to do. And I came back to him and I was like, all right, like I have basically deal terms. We just need to do a term sheet. And here's what it's going to do to the revenue. But it was a small acquisition in terms of like acquisitions. It was going to be, $1 to $2 million. And he was like, we can't do it. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, you wanted this. We've walked through things. And he starts to walk me through the business side, not of marketing, but of the expectations with the board. And I'm the CEO. And he's like, I'm the reason that we did our last $30 million round. They're expecting, we've done a small deal. We've done some small other things. They're expecting a big shift. He's like, I can't go to them with this deal that I want, that you're doing what I want. And I'm like, I'm floored. And so thankfully we had this mentor mentee relationship where I'm like, I did exactly what you wanted. And he's like, but my expectations that I know from talking to our lead investors are they expect something big, and this isn't going to do it. So if you can keep them warm, maybe we could do it in 6 to 9 months, but it's not going to hit the expectations that they want. And as we talk more through it, we potentially could have done it if he had set expectations differently at the beginning. And so like later on, he'd continued to mentor me through that, be like, as you've now stepped into CMO roles and you stepped in these other roles, and he was like, you always have to set those expectations up front.
You mentioned that the pivot in your style of VP of marketing and CMO stance changed when you met Reggie, and moving more towards this expectations up front. So eventually, when this pivot happened, you had a next role or a next opportunity where you were able to put some of that into practice for the first time, kind of fresh. What was going through your mind when you started down that path initially of like, I know what I need to do to set myself up for success. It's going to feel different this time. What was going through your head during that time?
I failed at the next role because I didn't fully hear Reggie. Right. So my next role was I was the founder and CEO of a company called Sidekick, which was one of the first influencer marketing platforms. We raised a bunch of money on the West Coast, and I did not implement things very well there. And so, at least in terms of this, the company did really well. But I went back to Reggie then later, as I was start as step out of day-to-day operations, and he walked me through some of the things that had been just difficult, where you kind of feel like you're running through molasses, and he walked through much more of the pivot that I didn't hear before, but he did expose me to. And so I moved then later, after that, into a series of fractional CMO roles with some very high growth companies, and some consulting as well on the side. And that's where I really started to implement everything, where it actually made my fractional CMO work incredible, because I had actually, as part of my sales process, so to speak, I didn't go straight the pitch for the fractional work. I went into, let's have the project, a paid project, to agree on what you're trying to do. Let's agree on what the investment should be percentage wise and dollar figure in each one of these things and those leading indicators. And whether you choose to work with me as a fractional CMO or not, this is going to give you what your hiring thing. You might decide you need to go hire a full-time CMO. But they felt more than justified in that, because almost no CEOs ever had that walkthrough. And I literally, like, the first client that I did that with, he did choose to move forward. For me, when I was doing fractional CMO work, it's always 12-month agreements. And not only did he sign the agreement, he signed the agreement and within minutes did an introduction to a peer of his that said, hey, I just signed this guy as a fractional CMO. You need to bring him on as well. And I was like, did that happen? Because most people are fighting for time, so to speak. And instead he was like, I've never had this experience before.
That's wild. With where you're at now and how you structure everything for success long term, when you're looking back at how you did things for years and years and years, I know that there typically aren't really too many regrets because the things that you went through shaped who you are now. But is there one small thing that you wish that you would be able to go back and tweak just a little bit to make life a little bit better, or just to make kind of that growth process expedite itself a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I have a practice that I do now, that actually is part of a keynote talk that I kind of give, where it's like I fundamentally believe now that there's at least three things I'm fundamentally wrong in my business in today that I think I'm right about. And I don't know I'm wrong about them. I think I'm right about them, and I'll find out in the future that I'm actually wrong. And because I have that, I've now realized this, and I have this process. It allows me to find the mistakes that I'm making today in 6 months as opposed to 12 months or 18 months. And so I wish I could have gone, and like, I know it's a broad question, kind of an ethereal answer, but like, there's not just one specific area. Some cases that maybe that I don't report out as much as I should. I always struggle against that, or the leading indicators versus lagging indicators, or hiring, like, but there's always something I'm fundamentally wrong in. And so I wish I'd have actually even had that humbleness to think about that like in my mid 20s versus now, because like the ability to figure out major things so much earlier. I mean, it's the speed of iteration.
The question I have for us to think about today is, where in my work am I actively delivering really good value, but not setting the proper expectations? And I have a very, very pointed experience share with this, because for a few years, in my company, we attempted to do more marketing services, not just web. Did a little bit of ads, did a little bit of brand messaging, handled some folks' social media accounts and things along those lines. And we did a good job with those. We had smart people that were working on all of those things, and we did what we set out to do. And the thing is, what we set out to do, what the scope of work was, and what we agreed upon at the beginning was, we will run your LinkedIn account and post 3 times a day, or three times a day, not 3 times a week. We'll run your Facebook page and post X number of times a week, and we'll also run your ads and make sure that we're updating campaigns on a monthly basis. And we did all those things well. And we moved the needle at the end of the day, because we heard from folks that, hey, yes, we're running ads, we're seeing these things, we're seeing website traffic up, we're seeing form conversions up, we're seeing new products sold. And at the end of the day, we still had churn. We didn't hold on to those clients for a long period of time. And going back and looking at that, it wasn't because the work that we were doing was bad, it was fine. But we did not tie each of those pieces that we were working on back to an actual outcome. The outcome that we agreed upon, the expectation that we agreed upon at the very beginning was, we will run these things. And that was it. And then at any moment when that budget tightens just a smidge, the folks that are just running things, well, they don't need to be ran anymore. And so we churned off of those. And so the challenge here today is to look at, what are you doing? And is it tied to leading or lagging indicators, or is it tied to anything at all? Or is the work that you're doing simply just checking a box and being done? Because without that depth there, chances are the work that you might be doing just might be a simple line item on the P&L statement, rather than actually showcasing the value of the good quality work that's being delivered. And in order to figure that out, you just need to go a level or two deeper. That's what Kurt got me thinking.